I'm Ford, 35, a single dad raising my 10-year-old son Thomas since losing my wife to cancer. I work as an IT security specialist, living next door to my mom's place where our family gatherings happen. Things got tense when my sister Diana and her husband Greg moved back to town last month. None of us expected that Sunday dinner would turn into a nightmare when my mother's money went missing. Before I tell you how my own family tried to frame my son for theft, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. My life revolves around two things: my work and my son. As an IT security specialist, I spend my days installing sophisticated security systems for businesses and high-end homes across our mid-sized town. The irony isn't lost on me that I secure other people's valuables for a living, given what happened at my mother's house. My company is small but respected, and I've built a solid reputation over the past decade. The flexible hours allow me to be there for Thomas, which became essential after Sarah, my wife, lost her battle with aggressive breast cancer 5 years ago. Those first months without Sarah were a blur of grief and responsibility. Thomas was only 5 when she passed, old enough to understand that Mommy wasn't coming back, but too young to process the permanence of death. We attended grief counseling together, and slowly, painfully, we found our new normal. I learned to French braid hair for crazy hair day at school, figured out how to cook more than just mac and cheese, and became both mom and dad rolled into one exhausted package. Thomas is a resilient kid, though. He has Sarah's bright blue eyes and her curious nature, always asking questions about how things work. We live in a modest 3-bedroom house that Sarah and I bought when we first got married. It's nothing fancy, but it's comfortable and just 2 doors down from my mother's place, which has been convenient for childcare over the years. Our lifestyle is simple but stable. I make enough to keep us comfortable, fund Thomas's college savings account, and even take a decent vacation once a year. Last summer, we went camping in Yellowstone, where Thomas developed an obsession with wildlife photography. My mother, Margaret, is 65, and has lived in the same house since I was born. After Dad passed away from a heart attack 7 years ago, she decided to stay there rather than downsize. Too many memories to leave behind, she always says. Mom worked as a high school English teacher before retiring and now lives comfortably on her pension and the life insurance policy Dad left. She's always been the family anchor, the one who hosts every holiday, birthday, and just because gathering. That's why Diana's return to town centered around Mom's house. My younger sister Diana, 32, and her husband Greg, 36, moved back to our hometown after spending the last 8 years bouncing between Chicago, Denver, and finally Atlanta. According to Diana, they wanted to reconnect with family and put down roots, but my friend Brandon, who works at the regional bank, hinted that they might have worn out their welcome in Atlanta due to some financial issues. Diana and I have always had a complicated relationship. 3 years apart, we were close, as very young children but grew competitive as teenagers. Diana was the social butterfly, homecoming queen, and drama club star. I was the computer nerd who built my first PC at 13. Our parents tried not to play favorites, but Diana had a knack for commanding attention. She'd often borrow my things without asking, and somehow make it my fault when I got upset. Once, she took my graphing calculator the night before a big math test, and when I confronted her, she cried until Mom told me to let her keep it for her own test later that week. I ended up having to borrow one from a friend. Greg entered the picture during Diana's sophomore year of college. He was a business major with big dreams and an even bigger personality. Their wedding was lavish, far more expensive than what our parents could comfortably afford, but Diana insisted on having it at the most exclusive venue in the county. Over the years, Greg has jumped from one business venture to another: restaurant franchising, real estate flipping, multi-level marketing schemes, and most recently, some vague consulting business that neither Diana nor Greg could explain clearly when asked. From what I gathered through family gossip and my occasional chats with Mom, Diana, and Greg's financial situation was precarious at best. They lived well beyond their means, always driving the newest luxury cars and taking exotic vacations. But Brandon had mentioned that they'd filed for bankruptcy in Atlanta before moving back. This information made me wary, but for Mom's sake, I kept my concerns to myself. The invitation to Sunday dinner came, as it always did, via Mom's text message with too many emojis. Family dinner this Sunday at 5. Can't wait to see everyone. Initially, I considered making an excuse. Thomas had a science project due, and I had some work files to review. But Thomas was excited about seeing his grandmother and using her backyard tire swing, so I relented. On our way out the door that Sunday, I got a text from Brandon. "Watch your back around D and G. Heard some concerning things at the bank." I didn't have time to ask for details, but his warning reinforced my unease. The drive to Mom's took less than 5 minutes, but as we pulled into her driveway, I noticed Greg's brand-new Mercedes SUV parked at the curb. For someone supposedly in financial trouble, the vehicle seemed excessive. Thomas didn't notice my frown as he bounded out of our practical Honda and raced to the front door, eager to see his grandmother and whatever treats she inevitably had waiting. What I didn't mention to anyone was that about a year ago, after a string of break-ins in Mom's neighborhood, I had installed a comprehensive security system in her house. Multiple cameras, motion sensors, and a state-of-the-art safe for her valuables, all connected to a secure cloud server that I could access remotely. Mom was initially resistant to the technology, claiming it was too complicated, but I set it up to be user-friendly with a simple app on her phone. Little did I know this system would become crucial in revealing an ugly family truth. Mom's two-story colonial had been the backdrop for every significant memory in my childhood. The wide front porch with its swing, the oak tree in the front yard where Dad had built us a treehouse, the flower beds Mom tended with religious devotion, it all felt like stepping back in time. Despite my apprehension about seeing Diana and Greg, the familiar comfort of Mom's home tugged at me. Thomas rushed ahead, letting himself in without knocking as he'd done 100 times before. "Grandma, I'm here!" His voice echoed through the foyer, followed immediately by Mom's delighted response. "There's my favorite grandson." Mom emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, the same faded blue one with embroidered daisies she'd had for as long as I could remember. She enveloped Thomas in a tight hug, planting a kiss on the top of his head before turning to me. "Ford, honey, so good to see you." Her hug was warm and familiar, smelling of the cinnamon and vanilla that seemed permanently infused in her skin from decades of baking. "Everyone's in the living room. Diana was just showing us pictures from their time in Atlanta." I nodded, steeling myself for the interaction. In the living room, Diana sat perched on the arm of the sofa, her posture perfect as always. At 32, she still maintained the polished appearance of the former pageant contestant. She was expertly highlighted hair, manicured nails, and designer clothes that looked casual, but probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Ford," she acknowledged with a nod, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "And Thomas, my goodness, you've grown so much." Her voice shifted to that slightly higher pitch adults often use with children they don't quite know how to talk to. Thomas, always polite, gave her a small wave but stayed close to my side. He'd never quite warmed to his aunt, perhaps sensing her insincerity even as a young child. Greg rose from his seat, crossing the room with his hand extended. "Ford, great to see you, man." His handshake was too firm, his smile too broad. Greg had the polished veneer of a salesman, from his perfectly styled hair to his casual but expensive clothes. "We need to catch up, talk some business. I've got some ideas I'd love to run by you." "Sure," I replied noncommittally, knowing full well that catching up meant Greg fishing for contacts or free security advice. The living room held more family than I'd expected. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Howard sat on the love seat, their adult children Ryan and Megan beside them. Mom's brother Uncle Stephen was there too, examining a golf club that presumably belonged to Greg, given how he was hovering nearby. "Thomas," Ryan brought his Nintendo Switch. "Maybe you boys could play in the den?" Mom suggested, and Thomas looked at me questioningly. "Go ahead," I encouraged, grateful for the distraction for him. As Thomas and his older cousin headed to the den, I settled into an armchair, preparing for the inevitable family interrogation. "How's work, Ford?" Uncle Howard asked, genuinely interested. He'd always been supportive of my career path, unlike some family members who didn't understand why I'd chosen fixing computers over something more prestigious. "Busy," I replied. "Just finished a major security upgrade for the county courthouse last month, now working on a system for Riverdale Hospital." Diana interjected before I could continue. "That's nice. Greg's consulting firm just landed a contract with Apex Industries." The name drop was deliberate. Apex was the largest employer in our region. Greg nodded smugly but offered no details about what this consulting actually entailed. As conversation shifted to other family members' updates, I watched Diana and Greg. They seemed on edge beneath their polished exterior, Greg checking his phone frequently, Diana's laughter a touch too loud at every joke. About 20 minutes into appetizers, Mom proudly announced she wanted to show everyone her newly reorganized home office. "I finally cleaned out your father's old filing cabinets," she explained as we all dutifully followed her upstairs. "And Ford installed this wonderful safe for me last year." The safe was mounted in the wall of her office, behind a sliding panel that looked like part of the bookcase. It was a high-end model I'd recommended for clients with valuable items. Not the most expensive in my catalog, but certainly secure. "I keep all my important documents in here," Mom explained to the group, "and some emergency cash, since I don't trust those banks entirely." She gave Uncle Howard, a retired bank manager, a teasing wink. Ford set it up with some fancy fingerprint recognition and a backup code. I noticed Greg's sudden interest. His eyes locked on the safe as Mom slid the panel back into place. Diana, too, seemed unusually focused on the conversation about the safe's features. "How much cash do you keep in there, Margaret?" Greg asked. His tone casual but his attention acute. Mom waved dismissively. "Oh, just a rainy day fund. Nothing excessive." But I knew that not excessive to Mom could still mean several $1,000s. She'd grown up during tougher economic times and always believed in keeping cash on hand. As we headed back downstairs for dinner, I overheard Diana whisper to Greg, "Did you know about that safe?" His reply was too quiet to catch, but the intensity of their exchange made me uneasy. Dinner was Mom's traditional Sunday spread: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and her famous dinner rolls. As we ate, Greg steered the conversation toward my business repeatedly. "So, these systems you install, they all have cameras? Cloud storage?" he asked between bites. "Depends on what the client wants," I answered vaguely, not wanting to give specifics. Diana jumped in with her own line of questioning about Thomas. "How's he doing in school? Any behavioral issues?" I read that children from single-parent homes often struggle with authority. The comment was designed to sting, and it did. "He's doing great, actually. Straight A's last semester, and the science teacher's using his volcano project as an example for next year's class." Diana smiled tightly. "That's wonderful. I just worry about him not having a female influence at this crucial age." Before I could respond, Thomas came running in. "Dad, can I go look at the stuff in Grandma's attic? Ryan's playing a game I don't like, and I remember there were some cool old toys up there." The attic had been our rainy day playground as kids, filled with trunks of old clothes for dress-up, board games from the 70s, and Dad's collection of model trains. "Sure, buddy, just be careful of the dust." As Thomas scampered off, I noticed Diana and Greg exchange a look. A few minutes later, Greg excused himself to take a phone call, and Diana slipped away to freshen up. With both of them gone from the table, I strained to hear Greg's conversation from the hallway. His voice was hushed but angry. "I don't care what they said. We need that extension. Yes, I know how much we owe. By Friday. I'll have it by Friday." He returned to the table looking flustered, his earlier charm diminished. Dessert was being served Mom's apple pie with vanilla ice cream when the first sign of trouble appeared. Mom checked her phone and frowned, then abruptly stood up. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, hurrying upstairs. An awkward silence fell over the table. Aunt Patricia attempted to fill it with a story about her garden, but everyone seemed distracted, sensing something was off. Thomas returned from the attic, dusty but happy, carrying an old kaleidoscope he'd found. He settled into the chair beside me just as a door slammed upstairs. My stomach tightened with that sixth sense parents develop the knowledge that something was about to go very wrong for my child. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the dining room seemed unnaturally loud as we waited for Mom to return. Thomas, oblivious to the tension, turned the kaleidoscope in his hands, occasionally putting it to his eye to watch the patterns shift. Diana kept glancing toward the stairs, her foot tapping an anxious rhythm under the table. Greg maintained his composure, but I noticed a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the house. "This pie is delicious, Margaret," Uncle Howard called out, as if his compliment might summon her back to the table. When no response came, Aunt Patricia shot him a look that silenced further attempts at normalcy. The sound of rapid footsteps on the stairs broke the uncomfortable quiet. Mom appeared in the dining room doorway, her normally warm face tight with distress. Her hand clutched her cardigan closed at the throat, a gesture I'd seen only during times of extreme upset, like when she received the call about Dad's heart attack. "Is everything okay, Mom?" I asked, already rising from my chair. She shook her head, her eyes scanning the room as if cataloging suspects. "Someone's been in my safe," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "The money is gone." The room erupted in a chorus of concerned questions. "What money? How much? When did you last see it?" Mom raised her hands for quiet, her teacher's authority momentarily overriding her distress. "I keep $12,000 in that safe, my emergency fund. I checked it just yesterday when I put my new will in there. Now it's gone." Her gaze swept across our faces, lingering briefly on each family member. Thomas shifted in his seat beside me, confused by the sudden tension. I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, already bracing for what I feared might come next. "Who was upstairs?" Mom asked, her voice now steady but cold. Before I could speak, Diana's hand shot up, pointing directly at Thomas. He was upstairs in the attic for at least 20 minutes, alone. All eyes turned to my son, whose expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "I was just looking at the old toys," he said, his voice small. "I found this." He held up the kaleidoscope as if it might somehow prove his innocence. Mom's face hardened as she looked at Thomas, and I felt a surge of protective anger. "Mom, you can't seriously think—" But my sentence was cut short by her explosive accusation. "Your kid took the missing $12,000 from the safe." The words fell like physical blows. Thomas flinched beside me, his eyes widening in shock and hurt. Diana immediately piled on, her voice dripping with false concern. "We saw him near your office when we went to use the bathroom," she said, nodding toward Greg for confirmation. "He was coming out of your room, looking furtive." "Furtive?" I repeated incredulously. "He's 10 years old. He doesn't even know what that word means." Thomas looked up at me, his lower lip trembling. "Dad, I wasn't in Grandma's room. I was just in the attic the whole time, I swear." Greg leaned forward, his expression grave as if he were the arbiter of justice. "Kids lie sometimes, Ford. It doesn't make him a bad kid. Maybe he saw the money and got tempted. It happens." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "My son is not a thief." "Then you won't mind if we search him," Greg suggested smoothly. "If he's innocent, there's nothing to worry about." The suggestion that my son should be subjected to a search like a common criminal made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. Thomas, however, could not. Tears welled in his eyes and spilled down his cheeks. "I didn't take anything. I promise, Grandma," he cried, looking at my mother with pleading eyes. Mom's expression wavered, the natural love for her grandson, briefly overriding Diana's insinuations. But Diana wasn't finished. "This is exactly the problem with him not having proper discipline at home," she said, her voice honeyed with false sympathy. "This is why he needs a mother figure, Ford. A stable family environment with 2 parents." The implication that my parenting was somehow to blame for this situation, a situation I was becoming increasingly certain had been manufactured, pushed me to the edge of my control. Thomas was now openly sobbing, his shoulders shaking with the shame of being accused in front of the entire family. Aunt Patricia, always the peacemaker, tried to intervene. "Let's all calm down. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." "Yes," Diana agreed with sugary venom. "The explanation is that children need boundaries, and clearly Thomas isn't getting them." Uncle Howard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Perhaps we're jumping to conclusions. We don't have any proof." "The proof is that he was upstairs alone, and now the money's gone," Greg interrupted. "I think we should call the police. Let them sort it out." At the mention of police, Thomas let out a frightened whimper. "Dad, please, I didn't do it." His small hand clutched mine desperately. I knelt beside my son, looking directly into his tear-filled eyes. "I believe you," I said firmly, making sure everyone in the room heard me. "You don't need to be afraid. I'm going to figure this out." Rising to my full height, I addressed the room. "No one is searching my son, and no one is calling the police. Thomas and I are going to step outside for a few minutes, and when we come back, we'll resolve this situation." Diana scoffed. "Of course you're protecting him. That's why he thinks he can get away with stealing." I ignored her, guiding Thomas toward the front door. As we passed Mom, I paused. "Give me 15 minutes, I said quietly. "I think I know what happened to your money." Outside, on the front porch, Thomas collapsed into my arms, his body heaving with sobs. "Why do they think I'm a thief, Dad? I would never steal from Grandma." I held him tightly, my mind racing. "I know you wouldn't, buddy. And we're going to prove it." As Thomas's tears subsided, I pulled out my phone and quickly texted my friend Brandon. "Emergency. Need info on Diana and Greg's financial situation as soon as possible." Brandon worked in the risk assessment department at the regional bank and had hinted about their money troubles before. I knew it was a long shot that he'd respond on a Sunday evening, but I had to try every angle. "Thomas, I need to get something from the car," I explained, keeping my voice steady to reassure him. "I want you to wait here on the porch. Take deep breaths, just like we practiced when you get nervous before baseball games." He nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Are they going to make me go to jail?" The question broke my heart. No, absolutely not. No one is going to jail. At least, not you, I added under my breath as I walked to my car. In the trunk, under a blanket, I kept my work laptop. As an IT security specialist, I never went anywhere without it. A habit that was about to pay off in ways I couldn't have imagined when I packed it this morning. Retrieving it, I returned to the porch and sat next to Thomas on the swing. "I'm going to let you in on a secret," I told him, opening the laptop. "Remember last year when Grandma had those break-ins in her neighborhood and I installed that security system for her?" Thomas nodded, his curiosity momentarily overriding his distress. "Well, part of that system includes cameras. Small ones that most people don't notice," I explained as I logged into the secure portal where all the footage was stored. "There's one in Grandma's office, pointed right at her safe." Thomas's eyes widened. "So you can see who really took the money?" "That's the plan, buddy." I navigated to the camera feeds, pulling up the one for Mom's office. The system stored footage for 30 days, so I had plenty of history to work with. I scrolled to today's date and began reviewing the footage from around the time we'd arrived for dinner. For the first hour or so, there was no activity in the office. Then, at approximately 6:15, the door opened. My pulse quickened as Diana slipped into the room, checking behind her before closing the door. She moved to the window, peering out as if ensuring no one was watching from outside, then pulled out her phone and sent a text. Less than a minute later, Greg entered. They spoke in hushed tones that the camera's microphone couldn't clearly pick up, but their body language told the story. Greg moved directly to the bookcase, sliding the panel to reveal the safe. My stomach dropped as I watched him enter the code, a code only Mom and I should have known. "How did he know the combination?" Thomas asked, his eyes glued to the screen. "Good question," I muttered, making a mental note to check if Mom had written it down somewhere. On screen, Greg opened the safe and reached inside, extracting a thick envelope. He counted through it quickly before tucking it into his jacket's inner pocket. Diana, meanwhile, stood lookout at the door. But what happened next made my blood run cold. Diana reached into her purse and pulled out something small, the vintage Matchbox car I'd given Thomas last Christmas, a collector's item he treasured. She placed it deliberately on the floor near the safe, positioning it to look as if it had been dropped accidentally. "That's my car," Thomas exclaimed. "I've been looking for it for weeks. She took it from our house?" I nodded grimly, the pieces falling into place. "They didn't just take the money on impulse, Thomas. They planned to blame you from the beginning." As if on cue, my phone vibrated with a text from Brandon. "Greg has 3 maxed-out credit cards and missed last 2 mortgage payments on Atlanta House. Creditors looking for him. Diana opened new account last week. No activity yet. Be careful." I downloaded the incriminating video footage to a USB drive I kept on my keychain, then shut the laptop. Before heading back inside, I received another text, this one from Thomas's phone, which I'd given him when he started walking to school alone last year. "Dad, everyone's being mean to me. Aunt Diana said I need to confess. Please come back." A cold fury settled in my chest, so intense it almost felt like calm. I looked at my son, this innocent child who had already endured the loss of his mother and was now being framed by his own aunt and uncle. "Thomas, do you remember what Mom used to say about the truth?" He wiped his nose with his sleeve and nodded. "That it always comes out eventually." "Exactly. And we're going to help it along." I tucked the laptop under my arm and held out my hand. "Ready to clear your name?" Thomas took a deep breath and squared his small shoulders. "Ready." When we re-entered the house, The atmosphere in the dining room was thick with tension. Diana was standing behind Mom's chair, a hand on her shoulder in a show of support that seemed as fake as her designer handbag. Greg was pacing near the window, while the rest of the family sat in uncomfortable silence. "Oh, look who's back," Diana said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did you help him hide the evidence?" I ignored her, my focus entirely on ending this charade as quickly as possible for Thomas's sake. Everyone was still gathered around the dining table, their desserts forgotten. Thomas stayed close to my side as we approached. Greg stopped pacing and crossed his arms. "I called the police," he announced. "They should be here any minute. It's the right thing to do, Ford. The boy needs to learn there are consequences." He hadn't called anyone. I could tell by the way his eyes darted nervously to Diana, seeking confirmation that his bluff was convincing. But the mention of police had the desired effect on Thomas, who trembled beside me. "Before we involve law enforcement in what should be a family matter," I said evenly, "I have something everyone needs to see." All eyes followed me as I placed my laptop on the dining table, deliberately setting the USB drive next to it like a gauntlet thrown in challenge. Diana's confident expression faltered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty that confirmed my suspicions. "What's that supposed to be?" she asked, trying to maintain her accusatory tone but not quite succeeding. "Evidence," I replied simply, connecting the USB drive to my laptop and turning to address the family. "Before we call police, I have something to show everyone." I gestured for Thomas to sit beside Aunt Patricia, who put a protective arm around him. My son looked both frightened and hopeful, trusting me to fix this nightmare. Greg's swagger diminished noticeably as he eyed the laptop. "What kind of evidence?" The boy was upstairs alone. "Yes, he was in the attic," I agreed, opening the video file. "But he wasn't the only one moving around upstairs." Mom looked confused. "Ford, what are you talking about?" Instead of answering directly, I connected the laptop to Mom's television using an HDMI cable from my work bag. The large screen flickered to life, displaying the paused video footage of Mom's empty office. "Mom, remember when I installed your security system last year, after the Johnson's house was broken into?" I didn't wait for her to respond before continuing. "It included cameras in key areas of your house, including your office." Diana's face drained of color. "You've been spying on Mom's house? That's creepy, Ford." "Not spying," I corrected calmly. "Security monitoring, with Mom's full knowledge and consent. The footage is stored securely and only accessed in case of emergency." I turned to Mom. "Like today." Before Diana or Greg could object further, I pressed play. The footage showed the empty office, the timestamp clearly visible in the corner. Then the door opened, and Diana entered, checking behind her furtively. That's Diana started, but fell silent as Greg appeared on screen. The entire family watched in stunned silence as the scene played out. Greg, opening the safe with practiced ease, removing the envelope of cash, counting it and tucking it away. Diana standing lookout, then deliberately placing Thomas's toy car by the safe. Greg's face, already pale, now turned chalk white. He looked like he might vomit or pass out. Diana's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish out of water. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to have stopped ticking in shock. Mom broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "You stole from me? And tried to blame my grandson?" The hurt and betrayal in her voice were palpable. Greg found his voice first, though it cracked like an adolescent's. It's not what it looks like." "Really?" I challenged. "Because it looks like you stole $12,000 from your mother-in-law and planted evidence to frame a 10-year-old child, my child." Diana recovered some of her composure, her expression hardening into defiance. "We were going to pay it back. It's just a loan." "A loan involves asking permission," Uncle Howard pointed out, his banker's sensibilities clearly offended, "and doesn't involve framing children." The weight of the family's collective disapproval seemed to crush Greg's remaining resistance. His shoulders slumped, and he sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "We're in trouble," he admitted, voice muffled through his fingers. "Serious trouble. The business failed 6 months ago. We've been living on credit cards, bouncing checks." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "The bank in Atlanta is foreclosing on our house. We've got debt collectors calling day and night." Diana's composure cracked. "It was his idea to take the money," she blurted, pointing at Greg, "and to to make it look like Thomas did it. Greg's head snapped up. That's a lie. You're the one who said your mother wouldn't miss it for weeks if we made it look like the kid took it. Their unified front collapsed completely as they turned on each other, each trying to minimize their own culpability. The ugly truth spilled out in their recriminations. They'd been planning this for days, ever since Mom mentioned her emergency fund during a previous visit. They'd observed Mom entering the safe code over her shoulder. The toy car had been taken from our house during a brief visit last week. Most damning of all was Greg's admission that they specifically chose to frame Thomas because no one would press charges against a kid. Thomas, who had been watching silently from Aunt Patricia's side, suddenly spoke up. "You stole my car," he said, his voice small but steady. "And you tried to make everyone think I'm a thief." Diana had the grace to look ashamed, if only briefly. "We were desperate, Thomas. You wouldn't understand." "I understand that you're mean," he replied, with the straightforward moral clarity of a child. "And you made Grandma sad." Mom had been unnaturally quiet during these revelations. Now she stood, her 5'4" frame somehow imposing as she addressed her daughter. "Where is my money now?" Greg patted his jacket. "Here. All of it. We didn't spend any yet." "Get it out," Mom demanded, her teacher voice in full effect. "All of it. Now." As Greg fumbled with the envelope, I moved to stand beside Thomas, placing both hands on his shoulders. "I think Thomas deserves an apology," I said, my voice deceptively calm despite the rage still simmering beneath the surface. Diana looked at her shoes, unable to meet her nephew's eyes. "I'm sorry, Thomas. We shouldn't have tried to blame you." "That's not good enough," I insisted. "You need to tell him and everyone in this room that you know he would never steal from his grandmother, that you lied about seeing him near the office." Greg handed the envelope to Mom, who counted the bills with trembling fingers. Diana's gaze remained fixed on the floor. "Diana," Mom prompted, her disappointment evident in that single word. "Thomas didn't take the money." "We did," Diana admitted reluctantly, "and we lied about seeing him near the office. He was in the attic the whole time." Aunt Patricia hugged Thomas closer. "Of course he was. He's a good boy." Uncle Howard stood, his expression stern. "Margaret, I think you should call the police. This is theft, pure and simple." Mom looked at the cash in her hands, then at Diana's defiant face and Greg's defeated posture. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the duty to uphold justice versus the natural instinct to protect her child, even an adult child who had wronged her terribly. "Let me talk to Thomas first," I suggested, guiding my son toward the front door. "We'll be right back." Outside, in the cool evening air, Thomas and I sat on the porch steps. He seemed simultaneously relieved and troubled. "Are they going to jail, Dad?" he asked. I sighed, considering how to explain the complexities of the situation. "That's up to Grandma. What they did was very wrong, not just taking the money, but trying to blame you." Thomas nodded, surprisingly composed now that his name had been cleared. "I was really scared when everyone was looking at me like I did something bad." "I know, buddy. And I'm so proud of how brave you were." I pulled him into a side hug. "No matter what happens, I want you to remember something important. I will always, always believe in you and stand up for you. That's what parents do." He leaned against me, quiet for a moment. "Dad, can we go home soon? I don't want to be here anymore." "Soon," I promised. "But first, I need to make sure Grandma is okay and that Diana and Greg understand exactly how serious this is. Do you want to wait out here?" He nodded emphatically. "Can I sit in the car?" "Sure thing." I walked him to our Honda, making sure he was settled in the passenger seat with the air conditioning running before heading back inside to deal with the aftermath of Diana and Greg's betrayal. When I re-entered the house, the atmosphere had shifted from shocked revelation to tense standoff. Mom sat rigidly at the head of the table, the recovered money placed precisely before her. Diana and Greg remained seated, though they'd moved apart, no longer a united front. The rest of the family had clustered at the opposite end of the table, as if physical distance could separate them from the betrayal. "Thomas is waiting in the car," I announced, primarily to Mom. "He's pretty shaken up." Mom nodded, her expression pained. "I'll talk to him before you leave. I need to apologize for doubting him, even for a moment." Diana made a small, dismissive sound, not quite a scoff, but enough to draw my attention. The flash of anger I'd suppressed for Thomas's sake reignited. Is something funny about this situation, Diana? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She straightened in her chair, defenses visibly rising. Of course not. I just think everyone's being a bit dramatic. We were going to return the money. After you'd successfully framed my son for the theft, I clarified. Let's not pretend this was a momentary lapse in judgment. You deliberately set up a 10-year-old child, your own flesh and blood, to take the fall for your crime. Greg, perhaps sensing the building tension, attempted intervention. Look, Ford, we screwed up, we admit it, but let's handle this as a family, okay? No need to involve outsiders. Outsiders like the police, you mean? I stepped closer to the table, placing both palms flat on its surface as I leaned toward them. The police you threatened to call on my son? Aunt Patricia murmured something about checking on Thomas and slipped outside, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation brewing. Uncle Howard, however, remained firmly in place, arms crossed over his chest in silent support. Ford, honey, Mom began, her tone placating. Maybe you should take Thomas home. We can sort this out. No, Mom, I interrupted gently but firmly. I need to say this, and Diana and Greg need to hear it. I turned my attention back to the guilty pair. I want you both to understand exactly what you've done here, beyond the theft itself. Diana rolled her eyes, her momentary contrition already evaporating. Here comes the lecture. Not a lecture, a consequence. I straightened up, crossing my arms. You violated this family's trust in the worst possible way. You stole from the woman who raised you, Diana, the woman who's bailed you out financially more times than I can count over the years. Mom made a small noise of protest, but I continued. Worse, you targeted a child who lost his mother, who's vulnerable and trusting, and looks up to you as his aunt. Do you have any idea what kind of psychological damage you could have done to him? Making him doubt himself, making him feel like his family thinks he's a thief? Greg at least had the decency to look ashamed, staring down at his hands. Diana's expression remained defiant, though I could see the muscle working in her jaw. We were desperate, she repeated, as if desperation justified everything. We're all desperate sometimes, Diana, I countered. When Sarah was sick and the medical bills were piling up, I was desperate. When Thomas needed therapy after she died and insurance wouldn't cover it, I was desperate. But I never, ever considered hurting someone else to solve my problems. Mom reached out to touch my arm, sensing my escalating emotion. I took a deep breath, reining in my anger. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice steadier. You're going to return Mom's money, all of it right now, and then you're going to leave this house. You can't kick us out of Mom's house, Diana protested. Actually, I can, Mom interjected, her voice quiet but firm. Ford is right. I need you both to leave, Diana. I can't look at you right now without seeing what you tried to do to Thomas. Diana's eyes widened in shock. In all her 32 years, I'd never seen Mom take such a definitive stand against her behavior. Mom, you can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? We gave up our apartment when we moved back. The Comfort Inn on Highway 8 has reasonable rates, Uncle Howard suggested dryly. I imagine they take credit cards. Oh wait, yours are maxed out, aren't they? Greg stood suddenly. This is ridiculous. We made a mistake, but you're treating us like criminals. You are criminals, I pointed out. Theft over $5,000 is a felony in this state. The only reason you're not in handcuffs right now is because Mom hasn't called the police. Yet, the implied threat hung in the air between us. Diana looked to Mom, perhaps expecting her maternal instinct to override her sense of justice as it had so many times before. But Mom simply shook her head. Get your things and go, Diana. We'll talk tomorrow, when I've had time to process this. For a moment, I thought Diana might argue further, but Greg placed a restraining hand on her arm. Come on, he muttered. Let's just go. As they moved toward the stairs to collect their overnight bags, I called after them. One more thing. They paused, turning reluctantly. Thomas's toy car, the one you planted by the safe. Where is it? Diana reached into her purse and extracted the small vintage car, a 1967 Mustang replica that matched the real car Sarah and I had restored together during her first remission. The toy had been a gift to Thomas to keep her memory alive, and Diana had weaponized it against him. She held it out, and I took it, resisting the urge to snatch it from her hand. I'm not going to press charges, I told them quietly, for Mom's sake and for Thomas's. He doesn't need to relive this trauma in a courtroom. But understand this, you two are not welcome around my son until you've proven you can be trusted again. And that's going to take a very, very long time. Diana's eyes filled with tears, whether from genuine remorse or self-pity. I couldn't tell. Greg merely nodded, defeated. Uncle Howard escorted them upstairs, presumably to ensure they didn't help themselves to anything else on their way out. In their absence, the dining room fell into heavy silence. "I'm so sorry, Ford," Mom finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have known better than to think Thomas would steal from me." "You were manipulated by people you trusted," I replied, softening. "And you didn't actually accuse him, Diana did that. But I didn't defend him strongly enough." Her eyes filled with tears. "Will he forgive me?" "Thomas has the biggest heart of anyone I know. Of course he'll forgive you." I sat down beside her, taking her hand. "But he's pretty rattled right now. Maybe give him a day or two, then come over with one of your famous chocolate cakes." She managed a watery smile. "I'll bake it first thing tomorrow." Uncle Howard returned, followed by Aunt Patricia. "They're getting their things," he reported. Patricia checked on Thomas. "He's okay, playing a game on your phone." Aunt Patricia nodded confirmation. "He seems all right, considering. Children are resilient." She hesitated, then added, "Ford, I think what you did just now, standing up for Thomas the way you did, Sarah would have been very proud." The mention of my late wife sent a familiar ache through my chest, but it was tempered by the knowledge that I'd done right by our son. "Thanks, Patricia. That means a lot." Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Diana and Greg's descent. They passed through the dining room without a word, heading straight for the front door. I followed at a distance, watching as they loaded their overnight bags into Greg's flashy Mercedes. As they pulled away from the curb, Mom came to stand beside me in the doorway. "I enabled her for too long," she confessed quietly, always making excuses for her behavior, bailing her out of trouble. "We all did," I acknowledged. "But maybe this is the wake-up call she needs." Mom nodded, her expression resolute despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "I love her, but this time there have to be consequences." I put my arm around her shoulders and gave her a gentle squeeze. "Let's go talk to Thomas." Mom approached the car slowly, as if afraid Thomas might reject her. I gave her an encouraging nod as she tapped gently on the passenger window. Thomas looked up from my phone, hesitated for just a moment, then rolled down the window. "Thomas, sweetheart," Mom began, her voice wavering, "I am so sorry for what happened tonight." Thomas studied her face, his expression serious beyond his years. "It's okay, Grandma. It wasn't your fault. It was Aunt Diana and Uncle Greg who did the bad thing." "But I should have believed in you right away," she insisted, reaching through the window to touch his cheek. "I know you would never steal from me or anyone else. You're a good boy with a good heart, just like your daddy." Thomas's solemn expression melted into a tentative smile. "Are they gone now?" "Yes," I confirmed, coming to stand beside Mom. "They won't be bothering us for a while." "Good." Thomas unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the car door. "Can I have some more pie before we go home? I didn't get to finish mine." The simple, childish request broke the tension, and Mom let out a watery laugh. "Of course you can, sweetheart. I'll wrap up a whole extra piece for tomorrow, too." The remaining family members made quick excuses to leave, sensing that we needed space to process the evening's events. Within 30 minutes, the house had emptied, except for Mom, Thomas, and me. As Thomas sat at the kitchen counter, happily working on his second slice of apple pie, Mom pulled me aside. "What will you tell him about all this?" she asked in a hushed tone. "About why Diana and Greg did what they did." I glanced at my son, who was carefully separating the crust from the filling in the methodical way he approached all desserts. "The truth, or at least a version he can understand, that sometimes adults make very bad choices when they're scared about money or other problems, but that it's never okay to blame someone else for your mistakes." Mom nodded, her eyes still troubled. "Do you think I should cut Diana off completely?" "I don't want to, but that's your decision, Mom. But I think some distance would be good for everyone right now." I squeezed her hand. "Just know that whatever you decide, I'll support you. But my priority has to be protecting Thomas." "As it should be," she agreed firmly. "You're a wonderful father, Ford. Sarah would be so proud of the way you're raising him." The mention of Sarah still brought a bittersweet ache, even 5 years later. "I try to think about what she would do in tough situations," I admitted. She was always better at setting boundaries than I am. "Well, you set some very clear ones tonight," Mom observed with a hint of pride. The following weeks brought significant changes to our family dynamic. True to her word, Mom maintained distance from Diana, refusing her initial tearful phone calls and attempts to minimize what had happened. When they finally did speak, 2 weeks after the incident, Mom was gentle but firm. Diana and Greg needed professional help for their financial issues and the ethical lapses that had led to their desperate act. Thomas, resilient as children often are, seemed to bounce back quickly from the ordeal. But occasionally, I'd catch him watching me with a questioning look, as if reassessing his understanding of the world and the people in it. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he asked the question I'd been expecting. "Dad, why did Aunt Diana want to get me in trouble? Doesn't she like me?" I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. I think Aunt Diana and Uncle Greg were so focused on their own problems that they stopped thinking about how their actions would hurt other people. "It wasn't really about you, buddy. They would have done the same thing to anyone who was an easy target." "But we're family," he persisted, his brow furrowed. "Aren't families supposed to protect each other?" "Yes, they are," I agreed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead, a gesture that had comforted him since infancy. Real family protects each other, supports each other, and tells the truth even when it's hard. Diana and Greg forgot those important rules. Are they still our family? The question gave me pause. "They're still related to us," I said finally. "But being true family is about how you treat people, not just about sharing blood. The people who stand by you when things are tough, like Grandma and Aunt Patricia and Uncle Howard, those are your real family." Thomas nodded, absorbing this distinction. "Like how Brandon is kind of like my uncle even though he's not really related to us." "Exactly," I smiled, thinking of my friend who had been there for us countless times since Sarah's death. Family is about love and trust, not just DNA. About a month after the incident, I received a text from Diana asking to meet. After some consideration, I agreed to coffee at a neutral location, a cafe downtown. Thomas was at school, and I made it clear this would be a conversation between adults only. Diana arrived looking less polished than usual, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a basic ponytail rather than her usual elaborate style. The change was subtle but significant, a visual indication of shifting priorities. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her usual confidence subdued. "I know you probably didn't want to." "I'm here because we're still family," I replied evenly. "Despite everything." She nodded, staring into her coffee cup. "Greg and I have started credit counseling, and I'm seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I've always been so competitive with you, why I resented your stability even when your life was falling apart after Sarah died. It was more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from my sister." "That's good, Diana. I hope it helps. I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she continued. "What we did to Thomas was unforgivable. But I want you to know I'm truly sorry, and I'm working to be better." She hesitated, then asked, "How is he?" "He's okay," I said, careful not to share too much. "Kids are resilient, but he asked me why his aunt wanted to get him in trouble, and I didn't have a good answer for him." Diana flinched as if I'd slapped her. I never thought about it that way, how it would make him feel to be accused by family. I was just so focused on our problems. She trailed off, recognizing the inadequacy of the explanation. "That's the thing about parenthood, Diana. It forces you to think beyond yourself. Every decision I make, I have to consider how it affects Thomas first." "You're a good father," she said quietly. "I always envied that about you, how naturally you took to being a parent, even after Sarah died. Greg and I have been trying for years, but," she shook her head, "maybe it's for the best that it hasn't happened yet. I clearly have work to do on myself first." We talked for nearly an hour, not resolving everything but at least beginning a dialogue. As we prepared to leave, Diana asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you think I could see Thomas sometime?" "Not alone, of course. Maybe with you and Mom present?" I considered the request carefully. "Not yet," I decided. "He needs more time, and frankly, so do I. But maybe someday, if you continue making positive changes." She accepted the boundary with surprising grace, another sign of potential growth. As summer turned to fall, our family slowly began to heal. Mom installed a new, more sophisticated safe, though there was significantly less cash kept in it now. Thomas started 5th grade with renewed confidence, the memory of that terrible night gradually fading into the background of his childhood. And I found myself reflecting more often on what truly defines a family. One crisp October evening, Thomas and I sat on our back porch, looking at the stars. We'd just finished dinner with Mom, Brandon, and his new girlfriend, a warm, comfortable gathering of people who genuinely cared for each other. "Dad," Thomas said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about what you said about real family being the people who stand by you." "What about it?" I prompted, curious where his mind was going. "I think we have the best kind of family," he declared. "We get to pick some of them, like Brandon, and some of them are born family who are good, like Grandma." "That's a pretty wise observation," I told him, impressed by his insight. "And you know what else?" he continued. "I think Mom would be happy about our family. Even though she's not here, she helped pick all the good people." The mention of Sarah brought the familiar mixture of loss and gratitude. "She had excellent taste in people," I agreed, putting my arm around his shoulders. "And she'd be incredibly proud of the person you're becoming." As we sat there under the vast sky, I thought about the journey we'd been on, not just the recent drama with Diana and Greg, but the longer, harder road of grief and rebuilding after Sarah's death. Through it all, the one constant had been this: the unbreakable bond between parent and child, and the fierce protection that flows from it. Family isn't always what we expect it to be. Sometimes it's smaller than the sprawling network of relatives we're born into. Sometimes it includes friends who step up when blood relations step back. But true family, the kind that deserves the name, is built on a foundation of trust, honesty, and unwavering support. Thomas yawned beside me, leaning his head against my shoulder. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, our small but mighty family intact. Have you ever had to stand up for a loved one when they were wrongly accused? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this tale of family, betrayal, and ultimate loyalty resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Remember, sometimes the smallest families have the strongest bonds. Thanks for listening, and until next time, protect those you love fiercely and without apology.